Around 2004, a study was made in the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies called Formalizing the Informal Sector. The author at the time, with whom I had the pleasure to host here on Nile TV International, was the world-renowned economist Hernando de Soto. His estimate was that by formalizing the informal sector, Egypt would stand to gain around $245 billion at the time. That was more than all the country's income combined. At the time, this was called thinking out of the box, and it basically revolves around formalizing the informal real estate, which benefits from stolen services, stolen infrastructure such as electricity, gas and water. But the informal sector does not stop there. We have informal dwellings and we have the informal economy as well. By implementing such initiatives, this country revives its huge potential, and it's not only physical. Human capital is the real cornerstone for any development, and parallel initiatives to harness this great wealth will make any country gain beyond any economic study. Good evening. Welcome to the Business Insider. I'm Ayman Salah. Our weekly program tackles events affecting economies and business, and we aim to bring you the inside story. Welcome back. We start with the first news item, and it goes like this. The African Union, known as the AU as you all know, is calling on state-run sovereign, pension and insurance funds from Egypt, South Africa, Morocco, Kenya, Angola and Nigeria to invest up to 5% of their capital in a planned infrastructure fund. That will finance the building of roads, power plants and railways across the continent. African authorities are looking for fresh sources of funding to make up for an annual infrastructure financing deficit of around 60 to 90 billion US dollars that has hindered development across the continent. This is urgent for any economic development and integration. With us on the line to discuss this issue is Dr. Passant Fahmy. She's an economic expert and a former member of Parliament. Dr. Passant, a pleasure to have you on the show tonight. You heard what the head of the African Union is calling for. Is it feasible?
It is very feasible. And we need to understand that Africa, if we look at the map of the whole world, Africa is the richest part which hasn't been touched for decades. And the whole world knows very well how investment in Africa can help and promote not only economy in the African continent, but for the whole world. The finance issue, I think, in my personal opinion, is the simplest one, because we could arrange for what we call the crowding finance. We form investment groups. Each one will be designated for a specific investment activity in the continent. For instance, one for the exploration, for instance, for uranium, one for agriculture, one for infrastructure. The crowding finance is the establishment of funds. Each fund is specialized in a specific activity, economic activity. And people would come and invest knowing the size of interest they could get out of investing in that type of fund. So I always say funding is the easiest part for any tripartite relation.
All right, so what else needs to be done to promote integration and development in the continent?
This is what I'm coming to. The tripartite relationship is built on, we have wealth in Africa, no doubt, but we don't have technology. So there is a party where they have the very high advanced technologies. Another part, which is the African countries, they have the wealth, And the third part is the finance. When we build a tripartite relationship clear, we explain exactly the type of investment we're going to do. We will see all of us, people coming from all over the world, wanting to invest in those funds because they know the outcome of it. Of course, definitely, it has to be very well presented and marketed. But it's a very interesting and easy tool to promote to the people. And I always say the easiest part of any investment decision is the finance. And I'm really honest about it. I'm a banker, and I know that.
So you see that the infrastructure financing deficit of around $60 to $90 billion is easily financed, and this gap can be closed, in your point of view?
Very easily financed, but it has to be very well presented by big investment banks, and they are known by name. They know how to present it. They know how to tell the people how they're going to get their money back and what is the interest or their earnings on it. It's a profession, and we have very big...
All right. On another note, you, as a former member of parliament, you've been in sessions, you've been tackling such issues. Do you see there's a political will to achieve this result on the part of the African leaders?
Why? Let me tell you why, because you mentioned a very important fact. Now the whole world is divided into regions. The globalization was not a success, and that's why they turned into another form of economic, how do we call it, economic participation, which is dividing the world into regions. We call it regionalization. For instance, if we take our part of the world, the Gulf is a region, North Africa is a region, the African continent is divided into regions as well, so on and so forth. So because we know what is regionalization, the investment bankings can arrange for that type of finance in a very professional manner, and it will be done not only for Africa, but for other parts of the world.
But for investors, wouldn't it be considered high-risk investments?
The technology presents now the markets in the world as being regions and not really countries in the real sense.
All right, let me wrap up with this question. The risks for investors, is it doable?
Definitely.
All right.
And the higher the risk, the higher the return.
Ghassan Fahmy, economic expert and former member of parliament, thank you very much for joining us here on the Business Insider. Pleasure to have you. Moving on to our second news item, we have it also from the Sovereign Fund. Egypt Sovereign Wealth Fund is looking for potential buyers of the fueling stations owned by the National Service Projects Organization, or NSPO. It is now also adding franchisors to the list of candidates, according to its chairman, Ayman Suleiman. According to the Sovereign Fund of Egypt, it was chosen to sell part of a portfolio of companies owned by NSPO in the country's first spin-off of companies it owns. The fueling stations are around 200, while the organization also owns a mineral water bottler, and both are among the auction package. The Sovereign Fund is helping sell 80 to 90% for NSPO's fueling stations, while retaining a 10 to 20% stake for itself, according to Suleiman. 3 other NSPO candidates are for sale in the food and non-food consumer goods, as well as in petrochemicals. Entrepreneurship and economic development is our topic tonight, and our guest tonight is Mr. Assem Ragab, who is the chairman of a leading private sector bank and former chairman of the Investment Authority here in Egypt. So stay with us on the Business Insider. We'll be back.
Entrepreneurship is viewed as a catalyst for economic growth and job creation, as it can promote competition and lead to bridging the gaps. usually refer to entrepreneurship, to promote economic growth and address reducing poverty, namely through innovation, job creation, and allocating proper resources. Encouraging this concept is key to advancement of a vibrant economy. It also goes hand in hand with human and social development in emerging markets, coupled with an ecosystem that encourages and promotes free market economy and the elimination of barriers such as bureaucracy or a lack of access to finance. Egypt's economy has faced several challenges along the decades. Topping them is the large population growth on around 7 to 10% of the country's surface, and a GDP growth that is still trying to catch up to the large surge of citizens' demands. This has created a situation where population density is high and the quality of life becomes affected negatively. Governments are concerned with this major challenge, along with others such as the country's resources, infrastructure, job creation, poverty alleviation, and the list goes on. Traditionally, the government has been charged with providing for the people all the necessities of life. Growth, on the other hand, requires sustainable economic development. Entrepreneurship has received more attention in the past years, in a bid to solve the vast challenges and surpass the economic obstacles. Entrepreneurs create competition, job opportunities, especially for the younger generation, which makes up more than half of the population. Youth unemployment is a major challenge, and it is with youth that this country and continent get their vibrant character and huge potential. In order to absorb the energy of this generation, many opportunities need to be founded. With technological advancements and the onset of the 5G era, officials need to keep up with the fast-paced demands of their largest constituents, youth. It is with this in mind that the governments have to polish up their monitoring and regulatory role and address the requirements needed to ease business activity.
Welcome back. Entrepreneurship and economic development, as well as the investment climate, are our topics tonight with our dear guest, Mr. Assem Ragab, who is the chairman of a leading private sector bank and former chairman of the Investment Authority. A pleasure to have you here on the Business
Likewise.
Insider.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Let me first start by asking you an assessment of the investment climate here in Egypt.
I think it's very evident that the current growth that we're witnessing the past at least 2 or 3 years is triggered and speared by public works. And I think this has been the main driver of the economy, right? And I think it will continue to be such at least for the coming few years. And I think this is very legitimate, given what is happening and what happened in many emerging markets around the world. Governments tend to go to public works when there is a slag or the slowdown in economy or there's a downturn. So that's a very legitimate. And what happened here is remarkable. In very brief period, we've seen huge investments in public works, utilities, improving the infrastructure of the country, as you mentioned in a previous report that you just mentioned. So basically, that is very legitimate, that is very strong, that sets the scene for solid growth and solid investments to come at the back of this solid infrastructure. But the question that needs to be addressed, what are we doing with the huge employment that these public works will leave at the end of those projects? So we need to have, so basically I'm trying to bring this topic into the entrepreneurship topic,
right,
basically, and the involvement and empowerment of youth, the empowerment of private sector, especially the youth, in building the new future of Egypt, in building the economy. So the question is, we have to, from now, set the scene and provide the right platforms for youth entrepreneurs to take the lead in the new Egypt, in the future of Egypt, once the mega projects that we're seeing starts to wind down a little bit. If we cannot afford to have this platform ready, then we will face a bigger problem later on, which I'm sure we're not. But this is a topic that needs to be addressed. Private sector involvement needs to, again, be on the driver's seat. Entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship needs to take a bigger role and a bigger lead, by all means. Empowerment of the youth, of entrepreneurship is definitely the key, buzzword or the key driver of the growth in the future.
We mentioned earlier, we talked about formalizing the informal sector I had, as I mentioned in my introduction, I had the pleasure of hosting Hernando de Soto at the time. He was on a visit here in Cairo, and he talked about his theory and how it would benefit Egypt by basically pumping in around $245 billion by formalizing the informal sector. This is something that needs to be addressed when you're promoting job creation and entrepreneurship, is it not?
Absolutely, absolutely. Let me tell you why. As you know that informal sector, the involvement and the contribution of informal sector in the economy is quite intense, right? It is hard to measure and to gauge what's the size and what's the contribution. We have many theories around this. But what remains to be true and what remains to be a fact is simply that in order to really move the informal economy into the formal economy, you cannot do it by force. You cannot push them into doing it. You have to provide for them the right incentive for them to take the decision to move willingly into the formal economy. And how is that? By reducing the cost and the red tape, basically the cost of doing business in the formal economy below the cost that they incur in the informal economy. So if you provide that regime or that incentive, they will move willingly, and this while they will have to contribute. So another philosophy or a slogan that we need to follow is that we cannot, at least we need to entice youth and people to become job creators and job makers vis-a-vis job seekers. It's a philosophy, it's an ideology that needs to change. And that will not happen unless you give them the proper incentives to really get involved into take risks, but calculated risks, provide them with incentives to develop their own businesses, to capture opportunities. We have tremendous opportunities in the country, whether it's opportunities of resources that is not developed correctly, or lack of or like shortage of services in certain areas of the country, or pockets of excellence that I need to develop. So all these are opportunities for work. But in order to really match them with the right entrepreneurs, with the right youth, you need to provide them with a lot of guidance, and you need to provide them with finance, competitive finance or access to finance. And at the same time, you need to make sure that the cost of operating the business and running the business is considerably low for them to proceed with it. If you burden them with taxes, with a lot of burdens and bureaucracy and red tape, then they will think twice and three times before they go ahead and do this act.
Let me just underline what you just, the headline that you gave me is to transform youth from job seekers to job creators.
Absolutely.
Right. Now, one of the major milestones that we witnessed some years ago was a simplified tax rate, which was a 20% flat tax rate at the time, and that encouraged many to enter into the formal sector at that time, compared to what the tax that people paid used to amount to.
Yeah.
Is this an example to follow?
Yes, but it's not alone, right? You have to have holistic approaches to things. You cannot have piecemeals like taxes, period. No. You have to have a full, well-rounded approach to those incentives. So taxes is definitely a big portion of it, a big part of it, but it's not alone. You have to provide them with a lot of incentives in the form of support, in the form of subsidies, in the form of a lot of hand-holding to the small and medium. Financial inclusion.
But subsidies, you're trying to get out of the subsidy regime.
Subsidy, I'm not talking about economic subsidy. I'm talking about
incentives?
Incentives, support, that's what I mean, basically. And that is basically what we need to be doing. So, especially in areas where you want to go, in like geographical venues that you would like to promote, in marginalized communities that you would like to incentivize to come at least to boost. And as I said, it has to be a collective, a holistic approach. Piecemeals prove to be, it's like, how do I call it? It's like patching the problem. But in order to really have a significant shift from one gear to the other. You need to have holistic approaches to things in order to make sure that it happens and it works.
One of the initiatives that was promoted was the central bank's loans at discounted rates, the 5% loans and the 6% loans. Do you see such initiatives as achieving the results sought?
Definitely, it helped tremendously because, as I said, access to finance is important. But as we all know, SMEs or small companies are not very institutionalized. So this is what I mean, holistic approach to things. You need support, you need hand holding. So yes, definitely this will help them, but we need all the professional services and other incentives to help them move into that direction. So having access to finance without having the proper management, without having the proper governance is not alone. So financial inclusion as a policy, as an ideology that the government and many governments now in the world is approaching, I think this is it. It has to be financial inclusion is not only access to cheap or competitive finance. No, it's a bundle of incentives. It's a bundle of initiatives that needs to be taken concurrently, in parallel, in order to achieve the results. One without the other, I'm afraid it will not give you the results that you wish. And that's why, even though that the initiative is excellent and it's achieving a lot of momentum, but there has to be, as we're seeing now, a lot of achievements happening by the SME government body that we've created, by the government as a whole, that they're putting a lot of incentives, and other parallel by FRA, for instance, they have incentives by marginalized segments in the economy.
Regulatory Authority.
Exactly. So basically, as I said, it has to be collective, it has to be holistic and in parallel.
There's an authority charged with promoting small and medium enterprises,
right.
The Small and Medium Enterprise Development Authority.
Yes, absolutely.
Doesn't that fall under its umbrella?
Yes, exactly. And they have initiatives, they have many initiatives, but again, this is one stakeholder. You have to have the whole country moving in that direction. The authority, definitely, the banks, regulators, the government, governorates. As I said, I always say that the real opportunities in the country is not in the major cities. The real opportunities is in the governorates. In provincial systems around the world have been really the main driver of economies around the world. In Far East, in Europe, in Germany, Italy, France, solid provincial systems, empowered provincial systems whereby I identify the centers of excellence in each region and I empower it, like what we're doing in Damietta, for instance. It's a center of excellence. Sohag, there are centers of excellence. Each part of the country has centers of excellence, and at the same time they have opportunities or lack of services or shortage of services. So basically, how can I leverage the shortage of services into a business opportunity, and I give it to the youth or entrepreneurs to get involved in providing this service commercially for a profit, and at the same time they're fulfilling a need in this region. Same applies to resources in each governorate or in each region of the country. They have resources, be it agriculture, I can go downstream into food processing, be it certain, like for instance in Damietta, where they have an excellence in furniture and woodworks. So, just draw a line along this and you will see a lot of pockets of excellence that you need to develop it, but it has to be concentrated, focused, regionalized, very much close to the community that I developed. I cannot generalize, Ayman.
When you look at the concept of entrepreneurship per se, you would think young generation. Is entrepreneurship related just to the young generation, or can I be an entrepreneurship at my age, at my old age, if you will?
Well, definitely it's not only exclusive to the young, but why we always attach it to young? Because of what is happening now with the revolution of technology, with the waves of we've seen a lot of waves of technology and a lot of waves of, if you remember NASDAQ, how and why NASDAQ was created years ago. So definitely it has been attached to youth, but definitely it's not. We have many, many examples around the world. You know, the most famous one is the KFC founder, the Kentucky Fried Chicken. I mean, he was an entrepreneur at the age of, I think, 60 or 70 years old.
I think, yeah, a number of fast food companies,
Right.
their owners were quite old when they succeeded.
Exactly. And,
finally.
And he is, quote unquote, he's an entrepreneur, and he started
Right.
at a very large age. So that basically does not confine to be a young. But see, what is happening now, and this is very, very important, we always see that technology is an objective. No, technology is a tool, is an enabler, right? So technology is only an enabler, and what we're seeing now, technology is doing two things. It enables a lot of business, but at the same time, it disrupts a lot of the existing business models that we are used to. You've seen a lot of businesses are fading away. A lot of the conventional business models that we have been practicing for many years is dissolving now and is being disrupted heavily by technology, right? So unfortunately, our ages are not really accustomed with technology, are not up to date. And this is why we always attach, you know, entrepreneurship with youth, because they're much more up to date. They're very much in line with what's happening.
Certain studies suggest that entrepreneurship relying on technology is a driver of growth, while entrepreneurship that does not rely on technology is basically filling social and economic gap.
Yes and no. Yeah, there might be, yes, but again, you cannot generalize, because there are a lot of bricks and mortar businesses that does not really heavily rely on technology, and it's surviving and it's working. It's related to probably to basic stuff, but fundamental stuff. But to be honest, technology is the future. I cannot, because it gets involved now in each and every segment and each and every industry in the world. Healthcare technology, food technology, you know, services. I mean, service industries by far now is the driver of economies around the world, as opposed to, you know, the conventional industries or the, you know, tangible industries. So it's basically relies on what? Technology.
Technology, right. The role of the private sector is quite important at this juncture. And I recall I was having a discussion with a friend of mine who has a factory, and he said they used to import certain components for their factory. And there was, you remember when we had this issue with the importation, and it was quite difficult.
Yes.
And when they started looking around in their neighborhood, they found that around the corner there was a small shop producing this small component that they used to import. So just basically by looking around into the small workshops that are available, you can come up with the required components, and you can harness your supply chain. Now, this mechanism that you talked about, this whole package that you need to work on, the supply chain is quite important, and here you have quite a big arena for entrepreneurs to fill those gaps.
True.
Would you agree?
By all means, let me give you an example. You know, what has been, you know, the driver of many SMEs and entrepreneurs around the world, there is a terminology called clustering, whereby you put the large producer or the large manufacturer surrounded by, you know, the, how can I call it, the feeding and buyers of it, basically along the value chain, before and after. He needs small suppliers that provide him with the small components or the raw material or what have you, and he needs, you know, like small buyers. So basically, part of the support system or the ecosystem, how can I really improve the entrepreneurship ecosystem, is basically to create clusters of around the sectors of excellence or the centers of excellence that we talked about earlier. So if we have, you know, the large producers or the large manufacturers, and I surround them and I make them with the smaller producers, smaller manufacturers, smaller suppliers, then I empower both ends. I have an off-taker to the small guys, which is the large supplier or the large manufacturer, and at the same time they become the clients of him. So basically this is how I maintain sustainability in the ecosystem.
And create economic development.
Absolutely, yeah.
Isn't this being done in the different economic zones that we are seeing opened every couple of weeks?
What do you mean? We don't have, we have one economic zone and we
Areas,
have
I mean,
investment zones,
right.
zones,
No,
free zones, and so forth.
What I mean, like in Damietta, for example,
Yes.
when you're talking
Yes.
furniture, in the leather area that has been designated.
True.
So you have these small clusters
Absolutely.
available in the different
And
projects.
this is what I meant by saying that it's a holistic approach. It's not only provide them access to finance. If I have finance and I don't know how to establish the business, then I can't go anywhere. If I have the finance and I need to invest a lot into heavy industry or heavy equipment, I want them to focus on delivering the business. I don't want them to focus on investing heavily in land, investing heavily in machinery and equipment. I want them to really go ahead and drive the business and focus on what they know best. So basically, by having those economic zones or industrial zones, specialized industrial zones or investment zones, then I create this, small community of similar industries where they integrate, they interact with each other, and I provide them with a lot of facilities. I can provide them with the location, with even the buildings.
Would such a climate attract foreign direct investment?
Well, let me tell you the cycle of this, because it's important to understand how the cycle works, how the investment cycle works. Investment, as you know, there are two sides of the story. One is public and one is private sector, right? One is in the private sector, there is the FDI, foreign direct investments, and there is the local ones. Currently, as we see, public investments contribute heavily to the GDP, right? Because of the public works, because of the momentum that is being carried to pick up on the economy at large. Private sector is not taking as it used to take in as far as the percentage of the economy as it used to be, but I think after the public sector it dissolves a little bit, I would believe that private sector should ramp up a little bit. However, now, FDI, foreign direct investments, will not come in unless they see the local guys, the local investors put money in their country, and that's by default. So basically, and at the same time, the consumers or the private sector will not put money unless they see there is a consumption or is a demand locally to purchase their work. So basically, that's the cycle that we need to understand. So at the end of the day, what I want to say is, in order for us to make sure that the foreign direct investments come in, I need to make sure that the local guys are well established, are fully supported. They don't suffer in the journey of doing business and the red tape and so on. And I think there has been many initiatives along those lines, but still there is a lot to be done.
How do you pinpoint certain sectors that would be drivers of growth and encourage entrepreneurs to access those centers?
The beauty about Egypt, I'm sure you know, is that it's quite a diverse economy. Quite a diverse economy. And population. Population, they say it's a handicap. If you think of it,
it's a wealth.
It's a wealth. And we've seen countries that use population as a driver of growth. The ranking of Egypt, as there has been many statistics and researches that Egypt in 2030 would become, the top 10, one of the top 10 economies. And one of the key factors and drivers of those researches and statistics is the following, is the number of population and young population, correct? So basically, by all means, this is an ammunition. It's not a handicap. But how we can gear it to become an ammunition, that is the question that we need to ask ourselves, and we need to work on it.
And that's the difference between you and Europe.
Absolutely, yeah.
You have a population, quite advanced age population in Europe compared to Egypt and Africa. You have a young population that makes up over 50%.
True.
If you will. So this is a main driver of energy and growth.
And exactly, I like the word energy, and this is a word that we normally use because we are the energy. The youth is the real energy and the fuel of the future. going back to your question, what are the sectors and what are the areas? I think service industry, by all means, is a wave that is taking the world. I mean, it's a wind of change around the world now, right? So, by all means, service industries. I mean, because service is definitely an area that we have a lot of investments and we have a lot of opportunities to improve on. The basic defensive sectors in Egypt, like food, retail industry. Retail industry, the beauty about retail in particular is that it's a heavy employer and it employs the real unemployed in Egypt. What do I mean by that? Because the unemployed by nature are not necessarily the highly educated, the highly sophisticated. So basically, we're talking about the majority of Egyptians. And normally the unemployment you will not see it in very sophisticated, specialized professions, correct? It will happen in the less ones. And this is where you will see the unemployment. Retail does not employ, sophisticated, professions. And that's why retail is an excellent industry. We're still under-penetrated in the country, and we see a lot of potential and growth in it. As I said, the basic defensive education, healthcare, food, as I said, service industries, and of course, which is one of the key ones in entrepreneurship, the feeding industries. The feeding industries to the larger ones. And when I mean industries, we cannot be the jack of all trades, Ayman. We have to really focus on where we have a value proposition, where we have a business case, where there is differentiation in what we deliver. We cannot compete on an industry that, at least that's my opinion, we cannot compete on industries that import all of our raw material. We can compete on industries that can take our local resources downstream, like petrochemicals, like food,
agro production.
Yeah, agro production, and so on. So these are the sectors that definitely we need to grow on. And we have a lot of shortfalls in our business cycles, like for instance, relations between wholesale and retail, right? A lot of fragmentation in this market. And a lot of gaps that needs to be filled. Technology, for instance, can become a major driver in filling those, service deficiencies. How can I call it?
Right.
Service deficiencies. It's much better to fill it through financial inclusion, through technology, vis-a-vis the normal way of doing business and going out and trying to do a hard sell.
Assem Ragab, chairman of a leading private sector bank and former chairman of the Investment Authority. Always a pleasure talking to you.
Likewise.
Thank you very much
so
for
much.
coming.
Pleasure being here.
Thank you for joining us. See you again same time next week here on the Business Insider. I'm Ayman Sabah. Good night.